aboard.
Hola, George.
Hola, Lisa. ¿Cómo estás?
Yeah, you too?
Bien, gracias.
Thank you for having us aboard.
My pleasure.
Please tell us a little bit about yourself, starting with where you're from.
From California, came down from Ventura.
Okay. And how long have you been cruising?
Well, it depends on when you start counting.
Uh-huh.
But if you mean full-time cruising, I would say 2.5 years.
Okay. So Circadian, is there any backstory to the name, or can you tell us a little
Not
about
not
that?
much of one. That was the name of the boat when I
Okay.
bought her, and it wasn't objectionable enough to go through the hassle of changing it through the Coast Guard because she's a documented yacht, and it's a little bit of a hassle.
Okay.
Have to change the paint on the transom and all that.
Yeah. So what's your background? What did you do before cruising?
I worked.
Darn it.
Darn it. Yeah. So I don't know if you'd call it a career. I had several maybe mini careers. I worked as a photographer. I worked in communications, marketing, public relations. Did some work for an office of education and a technology department.
Okay.
Variety of things.
And so what about boating? How did you get interested in that? Is it a long time, or?
Yes, I've been doing this for some 30 years.
Wow.
And I'll tell you a little story
You don't
about
look old enough to do that.
You're too kind. Keep it out of soft focus and people will believe it. So I'll tell you a little story about my first sailing experience because I think it's kind of funny. I was a kid, maybe 8, 10 years old, and near where my folks lived there was a little lagoon. And they used to take me there and rent kayaks and rowboats, and I just loved it. And one day my father decides to try renting a little sailboat, and he had no sailing training, no sailing experience, didn't know what the hell he was doing. So we get in this little boat, and of course what happens is it's totally out of control and gets blown downwind into the mud on the far side of this little lagoon. And I learned a lot of special sailor curse words along the way. Have no idea how we got back. But that was my first sailing experience. And about 20 years later, I had him out on my boat, and it was a beautiful day, an idyllic sail, and he turns to me, and he's got this kind of quizzical look on his face, and he says, "You know, this is kind of relaxing." And I just laughed and said, "Yes, it is."
Once you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
it's pretty relaxing, yeah.
Well, when people ask me, well, what's sailing like? I mean, you could answer that a million ways, but I usually say something like, well, it's kind of like life intensified and compressed. When it's good, there's nothing better, and when it's bad, there's nothing worse.
That's a good point. So, what are your plans now?
Well, one of your other questions you talked about was what's different from cruising than on land life, and the whole idea of planning is different. Because a lot depends on what happens with weather. A lot depends on the friends that you happen to run into and what their quote-unquote plans are. So plans when you're cruising are always very flexible and tentative. So given that, I have a good friend that I've known for 30 plus years, and he and his wife right now are in Mazatlan, which is a couple hundred miles from here. And we plan to head north later in the season and go back up into the Sea of Cortez.
Oh, beautiful.
And beyond that, things are a little more uncertain.
George, do you have any personal challenges as a cruiser, you know, being on board, being away from family, seasickness, anything? Is there any personal challenges that you have?
Well, occasionally I do get seasick, and it's usually when I've been sitting at dockside for a long time and haven't been out on the ocean. Sometimes I'll get seasick. So I just take the appropriate meds for me, and that takes care of it, and it's not really a difficult problem once I do that. The key, and everybody, literally, everybody gets seasick in the right, or if you want to more correctly say it, the wrong circumstances. So if you admit it, find some meds that work. You can handle it if you recognize it before it's too late. And don't try to be too macho about it. Another thing that I find difficult is staying up through the night. I don't do that as a single-hander just because I know that I have a really hard time with it. Some people, you know, can stay up all night partying. They can stay up all night doing watches. I'm not one of those people. I know it. So one of my upcoming challenges is when we cross the Sea of Cortez, that requires at least one, maybe two overnights, which is why I'm going to buddy boat with these good friends of mine that I mentioned earlier. They can keep an eye on me.
Will you have crew?
I don't think so.
Oh.
Having crew is its own challenge.
Sure.
And as you talk to cruisers, you'll find most of them, if they've picked up crew in some way or another, even sometimes friends for a long time, more often than not, it generates pretty big problems. And I've
Small
had some
space with strange people.
Yeah. Why? I mean, I'm sure that's part of it. But sometimes people who like to sail or want to cruise, well, let me back up a little bit and say cruisers by definition are abnormal.
Oh, okay.
Sure they are, because how many cruisers are there versus what's the general population?
Yes.
Right? So they're by definition abnormal, which for me most of the time makes it really fun and interesting. But
Okay.
sometimes they cross a line to crazy. And when that happens and you're on a little boat,
And you're the captain. And you
well,
have to
yeah, and you're the captain, it can create
Yeah.
friction and real serious problems.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love this photo.
Oh,
Tell me
thanks.
about that.
Yeah, I like it too, and I spotted it one day in a thrift shop, and I bought it just because I liked it, and later I discovered that it's actually an original print from a photographer named Michael Kahn, and it's included in one of his books of nautical photography.
Oh, it's beautiful. So tell me something. How is life aboard, living aboard, different than life on land?
I would say you have to be more mindful of things you tend to take for granted and not think about when you're living on land. And by that I mean things like, how much water am I using? How much electricity am I using? Which way is the wind going to be coming from today? If I set this cup down and get hit by a big wave, is it going to go flying? So you just are automatically sort of more conservation minded, more conscious of what's happening. And there's an upside to it too. You tend to be closer to nature and see the sunrises and see the sunsets and
Be present.
be
to
present.
What's happening?
Yeah, automatically. It's just sort of a requirement. You don't really think about it. It just has to be done.
I'm sailing a touch of liberty. I'm sailing a glimpse of eternity. All my dreams came true. Now my dreams are you. Feel the breeze to touch the sky. I'm sailing, breathe the liberty. I'm sailing a new reality. I'll be free with you. Now I dream of you. Feel the waves to touch the sky. I'm safe